Yes, visible.
My topic is how a crime scene investigation is conducted. So, before we get into it, we need to know the key principle behind crime scene investigation, which is Locard's exchange principle. And this principle states that whenever two body or two surfaces come in contact, transfer of material always takes place. So, this can be summed up by saying that every contact leaves a trace. And following this logic, what we find out, we can come to the conclusion is who did this or who did the crime or who is connected with the crime. And this principle was given by Edmund Locard, whose reign was from 1877 to 1966. Then we come to the word investigation, or what is the definition of investigation. So it is basically an art of unearthing the truth for the purpose of successful detection and prosecution. That is, for the purpose of successfully detecting what the crime is or who has committed the crime, and then his or her prosecution in the court of law. Then we come to crime scene investigation. So the investigation begins at a crime scene with the recognition and recovery of physical evidence. The circumstances that investigator encounters at the scene largely dictates the approach used to process the scene. That is, for different kind of crimes, the process of investigation varies. As for example, in this picture, we see a murder case. That is, in this picture, we see a body has been marked. That is, a dead body was there, which has been marked very properly. We also see some marked footprints. In the marking marked as number 3, we see a scale has been placed by the footprint so that the exact measurement of the footprint is kept and no one can alter the measurements in future. We also see a broken cash box, by which we can assume that the main intention was robbery, but the robbery finally led to a murder. In the next example, we see a rape case. In a rape case, generally the investigators look for body wounds, any scratch marks on the body of the victim, or any bite mark. From this kind of marks or this kind of wounds, we can collect DNA samples. We can also collect the sample. We can also collect the mark of the bite mark, that is the bite mark. And later, with the help of odontology, we can find out, we can have important information. Private parts of the victim are also examined for any kind of wounds to measure the vulgarity of the crime. And also some biological evidences are also looked for, as for example, blood samples or semen around or somewhere in the vicinity of the crime. In the next photo, we see that it might be a suicide or a murder case. If we see a person hanging from the ceiling. So in this kind of situations, the criminal may also commit a crime and make it look like a suicide. So a thorough search is required in this kind of situations. The investigators, assuming that it is a murder case, they will look for any kind of evidence left by the criminal, or if the investigator assumes that it is a suicide, then he or she may look for any kind of suicide note or any kind of solid evidence to prove that it was not a murder and a suicide. In the next example, we see a bomb blast case. In the bomb blast case, generally the forensic department looks for the explosive used or the place where the bomb was planted and the time the bomb went off. This kind of evidences are generally looked for. Then we come for a kidnapping case. In kidnapping case, there are generally two crime scenes. That is, number one is the primary crime scene, which is the point from where the individual was kidnapped, and a secondary crime scene where the individual was kept after being kidnapped. Then we come to the samples that may be collected at a crime scene. What are the samples that we can collect from a crime scene? Number one, we see biological evidences. As for example, blood, bodily fluids, hair, and other tissues. Then we see latent print evidence, as for example, fingerprints, palm prints, footprints, etc. Footwear and tire evidence, track evidence, as for example, if it's a muddy area or a wet floor, the criminal may leave his or her footprints behind, or if it's a, or it can even be the print of the tires of a car. Then we see trace evidence, as for example, fibers, soil, vegetation, grass fragments, etc. In case of digital evidence, examples are cell phone records, internet logs, email messages, or any kind of text messages or something related to this sorts of issues. Then we see tools and tool mark evidence, drug evidence, firearm evidence. Evidence collected is very important for the crime or to present it in the court of law. Then we come to the steps of a crime scene investigation. So the main aim of these steps are planning, organization, and coordination of work, which can help in investigation of a crime scene incredibly. So the first step that we come is identify the scene dimensions. Locate the focal point of the scene. So what is the focal point? The focal point of a crime scene is the main area of disturbance or the main area where the crime has been committed. Then establish a perimeter large enough to contain relevant evidence. So this perimeter, that is the initial perimeter, should be large enough so that no evidences are left outside the perimeter and those can be subjected to get destroyed. So we don't want that. So that is why the initial perimeter should be large enough to cover the whole area. And the third point, we see medication to the victim. If the victim is alive, then medication of the victim should be the foremost thing to do after reaching a crime scene. In the second point, we see establish security, that is barricading the crime scene. For this, the yellow tape can be used, and depending on the number of people, consider the security of the consider the security guards. Consider the number of security guards we consider. If it is a very crowded place, then the number of security guards should be increased. And this barricading is so important because in this topic also, Edmund Locard's exchange policy come in place. That is, if anyone unwanted enters the scene, he will leave his traces there or he may even subtract some evidence. So it is very important to barricade the whole crime scene with yellow tapes or any kind of other marking devices. In step 3, we see create a plan and communicate. Determine the type of crime that has occurred. Determining the type of crime that has occurred initially by the investigator is very important, which eases the next steps or which aids to follow the next steps. Communicate with your team about how to proceed. Consider if additional resources are necessary. Whatever resources is present in the uh, crime scene, they may not be enough to complete the whole search. So we can even summon for other necessary items that we may need. Identify any threat to the evidence, such as weather. Weather is a very critical condition if it is an outdoor crime scene because biological evidences are very much fragile and they can get destroyed very easily. So treating them very well is very much important. In step 4, we see conduct primary survey. Identify the potential evidence, capture photographs, and take good notes. Identifying the potential evidence and capturing it completely is very much important because we nowadays we use digital cameras to record the whole thing so that we can reconstruct the case in future. Or else in some well developed places a 3D scanner is also available, so which can also be used. Photographs are taken, lots of photographs are taken of every evidence or of every suspected evidence. Sketches are made, even diagrams are also created. In point step number 5, we see document and process scene. Using the plan made earlier, that we made, that how to conduct the search, begin processing the scene, collect all the evidence, and keep detailed document. All the detailed documents are needed to be kept, because which is to be used later on for producing our case in the court of law. A secondary search, that is step number 6, a secondary search is also very important, because this is conduct another walkthrough to ensure that everything has been processed and recorded. That is, no evidence is left behind, or we did not ignore any kind of evidence. So a secondary survey is very important. Then comes to point number 7, record and preserve evidence. Use an inventory log for account for all evidence. Create a thorough description that matches the photographs taken at the scene. Follow a clear chain of custody throughout the investigation. Now the point comes that what is a chain of custody? Chain of custody refers to the chronological and carefully demonstrates and carefully documentation of evidence to establish its connection to an alleged crime. And the chain of custody should be maintained in a chronological order. As for example, the case reference number, then the exhibit number, date and time of collection, item description, identity of the person who collected the evidence, location where the item was found, name and signature of the person who collected the evidence. These points are very important in case of chain of custody. Then we see crime scene search methods. We come to this when the investigation is proceeded. There are different types of procedures by which we generally search a crime scene. The first we see zone method. In this zone method, the scene is divided into small zones, and each zone is examined in turn by the investigators. Then we see stripped method, that is parallel lines. In strip method, the whole area is to be searched and divided into a convenient number of strips. Then the each strips are examined very carefully. Whenever any physical evidence is found, it is properly collected and preserved. This process is continued till the entire area is covered or the entire area has been searched. Then we see spiral method, that is either inward spiral or outward spiral. In spiral method, the search is started from one end of the crime scene, carried out in a spirals till the focal point of the crime is reached. Then we see grid method. In grid method, what we do, in grid method search, the search begins after completing the search in horizontal lines. Then he takes a right angle turn and again keeps searching unless and until the whole area is covered. Then we see wheel search method. In wheel search method, the pattern of a wheel is followed. Usually it starts from the center and 6 lines are drawn in a straight manner to the edge of the crime scene. And generally, the crime scene search starts from a critical point such as the body or the crime where the exact crime has been committed and travel outwards along the straight line or rays. In this way we can search all the in this way we can in this way we can do our primary search. Then the last point is random search. Random search is generally used in the secondary search when we confirm that nothing is left behind. It is just the investigating officer just goes through the whole area and he just make sure that we are not leaving any kind of evidence behind, or we are not leaving any kind of traces behind which might be important or very much needed in future for the case's future. Thank you, sir. I've finished.